Imagine a world where emperors hosted orgies with hundreds of guests, where gods of fertility were worshipped through outrageous rituals, and where the most bizarre acts were not just tolerated, but celebrated. This was ancient Rome, a civilization remembered for its aqueducts and legions, yet fueled by some of the strangest and most unsettling sexual practices in history. Tonight, we're diving deep into the weird side of Roman intimacy, stories that will shock you, amuse you, and maybe even change the way you look at history forever. Before we begin, do me one quick favor, drop a comment below with the time and your location right now. It helps this channel massively and shows me how far around the world these stories are being heard. When we think of Rome, we think of emperors in golden togas, soldiers marching in perfect formation, and marble statues of gods and heroes. But behind the grandeur was another world, one of desire, taboo, and excess. Roman society had a complex relationship with sex. On one hand, it was everywhere, celebrated in festivals, painted on the walls of Pompeii, written about by poets like Ovid and Juvenal. On the other hand, it was controlled, politicized, and often used as a weapon of power. And within that tension, some of the strangest customs flourished. From ritualized fertility festivals to aristocratic orgies, from divine phallic worship to emperors whose private lives scandalized even their contemporaries, the Romans pushed boundaries in ways that still astonish us today. So let's journey through the strangest sexual practices of ancient Rome, practices that reveal not just how the Romans lived, but how they thought about power, pleasure, and control. Religion and sexuality were deeply entwined in Roman life. Fertility was sacred, and sexual energy was believed to please the gods and ensure prosperity. Take the Lupercalia festival. Each February, priests called Lupercalia sacrificed goats and a dog, smeared their foreheads with blood, and then ran half-naked through the streets. With strips of freshly cut goat hide, they whipped women in the crowd, and far from resisting, women lined up to be struck. Why? Because it was believed the lash would bless them with fertility. Then there was the worship of Priapus, the god of gardens and fertility, famously depicted with an enormous phallus. Statues of Priapus stood in gardens, markets, and even doorways. Their exaggerated size meant both to ward off evil and to bring abundance. Some rituals to Priapus involved offerings that were far from innocent, including sexual acts meant to channel his divine potency. For the Romans, sex was not confined to the bedroom. It was cosmic, public, and deeply connected to survival. But as we'll see, not every practice was so sacred. Some were indulgences of the powerful. The Roman elite were famous for their banquets, which often blended dining with sexual entertainment. Reclining on couches, nobles drank wine, while slaves performed not only music and dance, but also acts meant to arouse and shock. Some gatherings escalated into full-blown orgies. Contemporary writers like Seneca and Tacitus criticized these feasts, describing senators and matrons losing themselves in drunken abandon. For the wealthy, these events weren't just about pleasure. They were about displaying power, proving that they could afford endless food, endless wine, and endless bodies. The Emperor Caligula was notorious for his excess. He is said to have turned parts of his palace into brothels, filling them with noble women and enslaved men who were forced to serve his guests. Nero went further still, staging theatrical performances where he himself took on sexual roles in front of audiences. Orgies in Rome weren't simply private debauchery. They were statements of dominance. The message was clear. The elite had the power to bend not just politics, but morality itself. For emperors, sex was never just sex. It was politics, theater, and spectacle. The most infamous case is Emperor Nero, who married a young boy named Sporus after castrating him. Nero dressed Sporus as a woman, paraded him through the streets, and demanded that the Roman people treat him as his empress. This wasn't about love. It was a performance of absolute power, a shocking display of control over both tradition and flesh. Then there was Elagabalus, a teenage emperor who reigned in the 3rd century. He shocked Rome by taking both male and female lovers, marrying multiple times, and even reportedly offering vast sums of money to any physician who could transform his body into that of a woman. To many Romans, this wasn't just scandalous, it was sacrilege, a direct challenge to the natural and divine order. These imperial extremes show us something important. In Rome, sexuality could become a weapon of politics. To defy norms was to remind everyone that emperors stood above them. If there's one symbol that defined Roman sexuality, it's the phallic charm. Known as the fascinus, it was everywhere. carved into doorways, painted on walls, even worn as jewelry. But the Romans didn't just see it as a joke. They believed the phallus had protective power. A pendant in the shape of male genitals could ward off evil spirits, ensure fertility, and bring luck. Parents even gave children little phallic amulets for protection. In Pompeii and Herculaneum, entire streets were decorated with phallic symbols, sometimes pointing the way to brothels, other times simply standing as a public blessing. Sexuality wasn't hidden in Rome. It was on display, woven into the fabric of daily life. To us, it may seem bizarre, even obscene. To them, it was normal and even sacred. Beyond festivals and imperial excess, Rome was filled with everyday sexual practices that still shock us. Prostitution was not only legal, it was taxed and regulated. Brothels operated openly, often identified by paintings of explicit acts on their walls. Men of every class visited them, while some women of the upper classes also sought services, though discreetly. What's stranger is how casually Romans talked about it. Graffiti in Pompeii advertises the names and prices of prostitutes, sometimes with reviews. One wall reads, "At Nuceria's, you can have the best for 2 asses." The lines between public and private blurred constantly. Sexual jokes filled literature, household items bore erotic images, and even oil lamps were shaped like genitalia. To the Romans, humor, commerce, and sexuality were all entangled. What we might hide, they flaunted. At the heart of these strange practices was a deeper truth. In Rome, sex was about power. Fertility rituals reinforced the dominance of gods over humans. Orgies displayed the power of the elite over both bodies and morality. Imperial excess reminded everyone that emperors stood above tradition, and prostitution revealed how thoroughly Rome had commodified intimacy. It wasn't simply about desire. It was about hierarchy. Men over women, free citizens over slaves, masters over subjects, emperors over all. Even the strangest customs, from phallic worship to ritual lashings, carried a message. Control of sexuality meant control of society. So what do Rome's weirdest sexual practices tell us today? They show us that history is not always as polished as marble statues. Behind the empire's glory lay indulgence, excess, and rituals that pushed human boundaries to their extremes. Rome reminds us that sexuality has always been more than private desire. It has been ritual, politics, power, and sometimes spectacle. And maybe the strangest truth of all is that for the Romans, none of this was strange. It was life. Before you go, I'll ask again, comment the time and your location right now. It helps this video reach more people and shows me where in the world you're watching from. And if you enjoyed uncovering this hidden side of history, don't forget to subscribe, hit the like button, and share this video, because history isn't just about battles and emperors, it's about the hidden practices that shaped entire civilizations.